All right, I show a little bit after 4, and I think we have everybody joining us. Again, we're doing this via Zoom webinar, and then also on Facebook Live. We're pumped up to have you today. I'm Billy Zanolini, Youth Livestock Specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife Extension. The unit I work in is Texas 4-H, and then more specifically, Texas 4-H Youth Livestock and Agriculture. Today we're bringing you our new classification guidelines for market lambs. We have an excellent set of speakers coming to you today that have a tremendous amount of expertise. But I just wanted to quickly just give you kind of what our goals are today, and that is to work our way through the new guidelines to kind of increase understanding of different terminologies, parts of the lambs, because classification, the purpose of it really is to get lambs into groups for showing purposes and to try to uphold some breed integrity within those. So if it's a fine wool cross, we're looking for a presence of a fine wool there, and so on and so forth. So it allows us as educators and as shows and anybody in the industry to have a set of guidelines to guide how we breed and join livestock and put them together to create offspring that can fit into some of these areas. And that's the goal of the training today, is to take you through those, increase understanding along the way. But the neat opportunity we have today is that most of these trainings take place at a location somewhere in the state, and it's really designated for just a few people. This gives us the opportunity to go ahead and broadcast it out, get the information out to the folks, whether you're a county extension agent, an ag teacher, an exhibitor, a family, a volunteer, a potential classifier, a show manager. Anybody can join and have access to our experts that we brought to the table, and you can ask them questions. We'll talk to you just in a second about how to do that. But just the main purpose today, let's make it educational. Let's work our way through these guidelines. Step by step, we'll go through each slide. Again, you'll have the opportunity to answer questions. This is a process that happens about every 5 years, where a group of agents, ag teachers, and industry professionals, along with partnership from the stock shows, come together to update these guidelines. So they try to follow trends, changes in breed type and kind, the addition of new breeds or divisions to shows. This committee pulls together and updates those guidelines. So what we're bringing you today is the result of the hard work of a lot of people. Some special shout outs go out to Dr. Sean Ramsey, which you'll get to hear from in a minute, and then also Miss Cheyenne Milliken from Gaines County, who put together a lot of this material during her graduate work. So a lot of the pictures and educational resources you will see forthcoming are the fruits of her and that unit's labor in terms of bringing that to you. Now the content, the adjustment and language and all those things, that can be attributed to the TCAAA Animal Industries Committee, and then also the ATAT Major Livestock Show Advisory Committee. So with that said, I'd like to keep this moving. I'm going to have somebody helping me quarterback this today. That's Miss Dottie Gable. She's an extension program specialist with Texas Youth Livestock and Agriculture. She's going to tell you a little bit more about how to get those questions in, the platforms that we're going to be using today. So with that said, Dottie, what do you got for the folks today?
Yeah, hey Billy, thanks for everybody being here. We have over 100 people already joining us, both on Zoom and on Facebook Live. So like you alluded to, this setup is a little bit different than what we're used to. We're first of all used to meeting in person, where it's kind of free-flowing questions, answers, that type of deal. But also we've been doing some of these online trainings, and the difference here is that we have not one, but we have 7 experts willing and ready on the line to answer your questions. And so we want to make sure that your questions get heard and get in front of them. And that's exactly what we're going to do. So like you said, we're streaming right now on Facebook Live, also on Zoom. So I'll start with our folks on Zoom. If you're joining us on that platform, you have the ability to ask us questions in a text format. So you don't have video or audio. Sorry, we can't see you today, but we hope to see you real soon down the road. But what you do have is question and answer. And so at the bottom of your screen, you'll see 2 comment bubbles with Q&A. So we'd ask that you type your questions there. and our panelists can see that, and we'll get those questions to them in a manner that makes sense. So if you ask one and we don't ask it right away, I promise we're going to get to it. So just get it in there, and we'll get it to our experts when we can. For our folks joining us on Facebook Live, that one's really exciting for us. You get to comment in real time along with us while we're going along, and we ask you to do that, and we'll get those in as well. We also ask you to like, comment, and share that post so that all your friends can see it, because we know that while there's over 120 of us now on here, we know a lot more folks in the state show lambs. So get that out to them so they can see it, and get your comments in right now just to get us all comfortable with that. Why don't you comment, if you're on Facebook Live, comment where you're watching from, and maybe what breed of sheep you like to show. And we'll see you watching on here and get your questions answered. So with that, Billy, happy to have everyone on here. Let's get started.
Outstanding. Thank you, Dottie, for that, and let's keep this thing moving. As promised, we said we were going to bring you to the experts, and we have one for you right here. I would argue one of the top people in the whole United States regarding lamb and goat production, and that's our very own Dr. Sean Ramsey, who is an extension program specialist, professor and assistant head for undergraduate programs at Texas A&M. And as I mentioned, just put a ton of work into this project, and we're really excited to hear from him. So, Dr. Ramsey, tell the folks what you have for him today.
Hey, Billy, thanks. We're super excited to bring this new program to you guys out there. A lot of great information. And we started off, the committee thought it would be great to have just a picture of a lamb. You hear a lot of classifiers talking about, and all of the experts here are going to talk about different aspects of each of these breeds and where they're looking. So we thought it would be good to have a diagram up here to talk about these different parts, especially head. So as you're out evaluating these different animals, these different breeds, it's super important to look at their body type, their head shape. You're going to see a lot of our presenters today talk about head shape. You're also going to hear a lot of presenters talk about different spots and coloration or wool patterns on the body. So with that, the first thing we're going to talk about is kind of the scur area, which is at the top of the head. Many of our breeds are polled. A couple of our breeds, like the fine wools, do have horns. And so that's one of the areas that you need to understand when you're picking those lambs, the scur area. You'll also see our heart girth area. In our Dorper breed, that's going to be an important area because we don't want a lot of coloration or any coloration behind the heart girth area. Down there on the legs, in the foreflank and above the knee on the front of the animal. And for example, on our crossbreds, we don't want to see a lot of extra speckles and spots up in that area. Our fine wools and Southdowns, we're going to hear about chalky hair in those areas. You're also going to see, as we move toward the back of the animal, a very important aspect of all the species or all the breeds is the britch. Now, the britch area is important because that tends to be one of the coarser wooled areas on a sheep. And so in that area, when we're evaluating fine wools, when we're evaluating fine wool crosses, that area is looked at very intensely. It's rubbed on very intensely by our classifiers to determine the fineness as well as some of that wool pattern. And so as we go through here, you'll hear Jamie Osborne talking on the crosses about the wool pattern in that britch area. A fine wool cross is a fine wool ewe, Rambouillet, Debouillet on a medium wool Suffolk Camp Ram. When we get too much medium wool in there, that pattern starts to vary. And so those are the things and major areas that we're going to look at on all of these different breeds. And so it's important that the people out there, when you're buying these projects, know the parts of the animal, because they're very specific areas that the classifier is going to be looking at. And so it's important to know these areas to evaluate those lambs when you purchase them. If they don't meet the qualifications or the classification standards when they're little, it's probably not going to change a whole lot. So we can go to the next slide. So just some classification terminology. Acceptable. We're going to hear a lot of different parts about what's acceptable. So it's good that the exhibitors know what is acceptable, and those are characteristic of each particular breed, whether that's coloration, whether that's head shape, whether that's fineness or softness of the wool. And those are the things that we want to see lots of in our lamb projects. Now, something that is discriminatory is something that is not conducive for that particular breed. Normally, what we like is our classifiers, unless it's a very, very bad problem, most classifiers are going to look and say, it kind of needs to be 3 things to make an animal get a red chip. And so as a discriminatory thing, it's not a reason for absolute disqualification, but when we start combining those, it could lead an animal to be disqualified from that breed. Now, there are some very significant ones that are absolute disqualifications, and our experts are going to go over those with them. We'll talk about that. We've talked about a scur, as a scur is a horn growth that is not completely attached to the skull. You also will spend some significant amount of time talking about the good old birthmark. And we had lots of discussions on this one as we were putting this information together. And so a birthmark is that spot on an animal that's dark pigmented skin that also produces dark pigment. And that's dark fiber, okay? So it has dark pigment and it also produces dark fiber. Now, in a lot of our breeds, Southdowns, crosses, Dorpers, they appear white. And then when we shear them, we see some coloration in the skin. That's okay, as long as the fiber coming out of that is not dark. It's very important to look at, especially in our Dorpers, and Brad Rader is going to talk about that, because there's a cumulative effect on those dark fibers that can add up to a disqualification. One other one that we're going to talk about, or we're going to discuss a little bit, and this one is the callipege gene. And so the callipege gene is a genetic mutation causing muscle hypertrophy, in which the muscles are really big. And so oftentimes when we look at the animal, we will see differences, whether they're short-hipped, but they just have more muscle than is normal, okay? And so this is a genetic thing, this gene expression that started out in the Dorset breed. And so as it is genetic, it is through crossbreeding, which is not a desirable thing. That gene has developed and been implemented in a majority of all of our breeds. And so the big problem that we have with the callipege gene is, yes, it produces more muscle, but we have a meat tenderness and a meat quality issue in which our packing industry does not find that acceptable. And so that callipege gene, that is one that's automatically an absolute disqualification. So here's a picture of an animal with scurs, and it's very important that you know which one of those species can have scurs. Most of our species are not allowed to have scurs, and that's one important area that we're going to look at and our experts are going to talk about, okay? And then our next slide, here's the callipege gene that we talked about. This one happens to be in a Southdown, but you can see that sheep has way more muscle back there in the hindquarters, and callipege is Greek and actually stands for beautiful buttocks, is what callipege means in the Greek language. And so that's where we see the majority of that gene expressed. And so these animals have a very particular body type in terms of their skeletal makeup and are pretty easy to pick out. And so those are some things that we want you as the exhibitor to be aware of, some key points that our classifiers are going to be looking for. And just because we have things that you don't want your lamb to have, there's different levels of what I would call good or bad. And we want lots of good things, but the bad things don't need to add up. And so that's why we have the categories broken down into acceptable, and then the totally unacceptable, and then the ranges in between. And so the discriminatory Normally, as long as it's not bad, one little blemish on that animal's breed type is probably not going to get you disqualified. It's the accumulation of those as we go through there. All right.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ramsey. That was an outstanding way to get us started and let us know what some of the terminology, parts of the animal, just so we're all speaking the same language right out the gate here. I'd like to pitch it to Dottie. I know some questions have been coming in on Zoom and Facebook Live. As promised, we want to keep this interactive, get you access to those experts. Take it away, Dottie.
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Ramsey. That was a great description. And me and you have been doing some other Facebook videos and have been having quite a bit of fun. And I know that you're just the guy we need on here. So like Billy said, we do have some questions coming in on Zoom and on Facebook Live. I do want to note, though, on Facebook Live, we have a bit of a delay between what we're saying here on Zoom and what's going on Facebook. So just know that your questions are welcomed on Facebook. So as soon as we're talking about it and you have a question, get them in there and we'll get them addressed. Certainly, if we move on, just know that we're going to come back around to it at the end, at the Q&A session at the end of the show. So again, don't feel bad, get them in there and we'll get them addressed one way or another. First off, Dr. Ramsey, I hope this one's quick, just a bit of clarification on something that used to get said quite a bit, and that's on the number of discriminatory factors that could go into being disqualified. Used to, a lot of people said, 3-strike rule or something like that. Can you clarify if there's a certain number or just a bit of excessiveness? Can you clarify on that?
Certainly, Dottie, that's a great question. And so you have to remember this whole process that we have is a subjective process. And so you have to keep that in mind, that anything that's subjective has some discrepancies in it. But it's still, as I go around to other states, it's still the best program and system that we have out there. Normally, under normal circumstances, we kind of have a 3-strike rule. And so if an animal has 3 small discriminatory things, then they would receive a red chip. If they have 1 and everything else is fine, and it's a small discriminatory problem, then they will probably get a white chip. Now, if they have 1 discriminatory item, and it is a very large discriminatory item, then that could also be grounds for getting a red chip. So most part, difficult answer, and I'm trying not to be vague, but normally 3 strikes and you're out. But if it's a major strike, you can also be out.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Ramsey. Appreciate that one. Another question we have is, a lot of us here are new to showing sheep, or at least a lot of our viewers on Facebook and Zoom, and that's exactly why they're here, and we're so glad that they are. One question we had come in on Zoom is, for folks new to the game, or even maybe those who've been around, can you elaborate more on what the skir area is and maybe how it differs from the poll or other areas of the head?
Sure. And we might get Billy to back up our slides to the picture with the skir. A skir, there we go. And so a skir is the same material as a horn, but a skir is not firmly attached to the skull. And so on the picture that we have on the screen, if I reached up there and grabbed that horn type tissue, it would be loose and it would move around. And so in relationship to a horn, okay, the horn is going to be more solid, it's going to be bigger, and it's going to be hard attached to the skull. And we see that primarily in our fine wool breeds. So the skir area is right here, where you can see on either side of the white circle in the middle of this lamb's head. That is the skir area. Now the pole was going to be where that white spot is. That is the pole area, or the top of the head.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Ramsey. One last question for you before we move on to our first breed, which is fine wool, is folks are wondering why the callipege gene would be an automatic disqualification.
Okay, the callipege gene is an automatic disqualification because of the muscle tenderness, the muscle quality issue. And so these animals are going to end up in our food supply. And we do not want somebody to buy a leg of lamb and have a bad eating experience. And so the quality of that meat, it tends to be tougher. And so what we've tried to do is protect our consumers from having a bad eating experience. Okay.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Ramsey. Real quick, we'll move on to the next breed that we already have pulled up, which is fine wool. Again, just wanted to encourage everyone to ask those questions and we'll keep moving.
Well, Dottie, we promised expertise and experts to join us today, and I think everybody can agree. Dr. Ramsey really brought a lot of quality information that'll be of value to you. And don't worry, he's going to be sticking around, as will all of our presenters. Stick around at the end for a bigger Q&A. So keep those questions coming in. But as you can see there on the screen, we got fine wools to talk about. We have Mr. Josh Blanick, County Extension Agent for Agriculture and Natural Resources there in Tom Green County. He lives in fine wool country, sees them every day. We're very blessed to have him today. We're very excited to have you. Josh, go ahead and take us through the fine wools.
Dr. Zanolini, thanks for the introduction and good afternoon from San Angelo, Texas. Just as you kind of study these two pictures here of some just real classic examples of our fine wool breeds, quick little trivia. We're really proud of fine wools in West Texas and Texas in general. San Angelo, if you've ever visited here, you'll see a bunch of Rambouillet U's, fiberglass U's around town. We've been nicknamed the wool capital of the world since the early 1930s. These fine wool sheep really laid a foundation for our ranching industry, had a huge impact on the economy, and just really proud of that. As you study those pictures and we move on to the next slide, we're going to talk about the acceptable breed traits of the fine wool sheep. Number one, they're comprised of Rambouillet, Delaine, Debouillet, or a cross between these breeds. You're most commonly going to see the Rambouillet breed in our show lamb flocks. They're going to have a soft, silky white face. And we're going to show you some examples of this here in a minute that you can kind of put with these breed traits. Again, they're going to have soft, silky ears. Ears are going to be medium to moderate in length. They're going to have a soft pelt. A pelt is the skin or the hide of a lamb with the wool attached to it. And so if you see those classifiers handling, you heard Dr. Ramsey talk about handling the breech, which is very important, but they're going to handle the whole pelt on a fine wool. Hooves are going to be yellow to white in color, kind of a neutral color. Black pads on the hooves and dew claws are acceptable. Just remember, that's just for the pads and dew claws only. Minimum amount of black streaking in the hooves. Remember this, less than 1/8 of cumulative hoof surface is acceptable. Their noses should be neutral to pink in color, and fine wools may be polled or horned, and horns must be indicative of acceptable fine wool breeds. So we move on to that next slide, and we've got 3 pictures here to show you. Really good examples of the fine wool breed. Starting from the left, a good classic picture of one there. You can automatically tell this sheep really soft to the touch on his head. He's got that silky white face. He's real moderate in his length of his ear. Ear placement's correct. We'll show you some horns later, but it just really shows that fine wool breed horn characteristic there. Long, narrow through his head and through his muzzle, really clean. The middle picture shows his boots. Again, you want those boots to be soft and silky and woolly with no color discoloration in them. And then the picture on the right, like he alluded to earlier, the correct softness of the breech. These fine wool breeds were developed for their fine wool to make clothing. When you're looking at sheep, you want those pelts and that breech to be soft handling. You don't want any coarseness to it. And if you get that, that's just kind of showing another breed that's showing up into the fine wools. As we move into the discriminatory breed traits and some things that you're going to be wanting to, as you're buying sheep this summer, looking out for, classifiers are going to be looking for when you go to those shows. Moderate amounts of brown or black spots in the skin or wool you don't want to see. Moderate freckling or pigmented skin, which is brown or black on the ears, eyes, nose, and lips. Black eyelashes are discriminatory. excessive black streaking in the hooves, more than 1/8 cumulative of hoof surface. So it's acceptable if they're less than 1/8, but it gets discriminatory if they are more than 1/8 of the total hoof surface. And then birthmarks. The next slide, we got some pictures here. We kind of put all this together for you. We talked about moderate amounts of brown or black spots in the skin and or wool. We got a picture here, kind of an exaggerated example. It's a pretty big black spot for you, but we want to make sure it showed up on the slides and if you could see it. You got some black spots here on both back feet of this sheep. That's something that you really want to look for and evaluate for when you're purchasing sheep this summer. The next slide, we're going to show a headshot. First picture to the left, lots of or some discoloration around the eyes. You can see the brown coming from the eyelids moving on out. You can see those black spots there in the corner of the eye and both on the top and bottom eyelid. You want to watch for that. The center picture shows the freckling or markings on or around the nose and the mouth. You can see the freckling on top of his nose, around the nostril, on the upper and the bottom lip there, the pigmented brown marks. And then our picture to the right shows the freckling on the ears and the head that you don't want to see on these fine wool breeds. You can definitely see the black freckling on the top of the ear. If you move down, you can see some brown there on the tip of the ear and a little discoloration there in the ear. Our next picture kind of shows you a closer up view of fine wool here. Again, we talked about this one a while ago. He's got that brown pigmented on his nose and his lips. And if you look more closely, he's got the dark eyelashes there around his eye. That is a discriminatory characteristic. And then the picture to the right, a good close-up view of that when you're looking at these fine wool sheep. These dark brown eyelashes that he has there. Doesn't matter. I mean, it can be the whole eyelash like that, or you can just have some mixed in there. And then a really good example of the black pigment around the eye there. Almost looks like he kind of has some makeup on there, but that's a really good picture and example of the eyelashes and the pigment around the eye. Our next slide here shows the black streaking in hooves. Again, when you get more than that 1/8 cumulative hoof surface in these fine wools, that's something you want to really avoid when purchasing these animals and what classifiers are looking for. Picture on the left, definitely you can see that picture there. It comes pretty much 3/4 of that hoof surface right there in that picture. Really defined black marking there. The picture on the right, a little harder to see. You can see that narrow band there on the front of that hoof. And as you look to the side, you can see some more black streaking there in that hoof. But two good, really good examples there. Our next slide kind of defines there and talks about birthmarks and black spots on the body. Here's an example. You don't want to see these on these fine wool sheep. That's a characteristic that we don't want to see. We don't want that to get excessive. Don't want it to get really over moderate. And we'll talk some more about that here in another slide later in the slides, but just watch out for that. So these absolute disqualifications that Dr. Ramsey talked about, when you have some of these, this is when you're going to have issues classifying. So when you're purchasing these fine wools this summer, really be on the lookout for these type things. And if you see any one of these, just stay away from them. There's more fine wools there to go through and stay away. Number one, we talked about this a while ago, excessively coarse breech and a harsh pelt. Fine wools are a fine wool breed. That's where they get the name. It should be soft to the touch. Excessive coarse, chalky white hair on the face, in the flanks, and or down the front or rear legs. We'll show you some examples of this here on the fine wools and even in the other breeds that really will make sense of that coarse, chalky white hair. I get a lot of questions about that as an advisor, a county agent. And explaining it's hard. You really got to kind of see it. But just think of an old man with a beard. He hadn't shaved in a couple of days. Just gets really coarse and white and chalky, and it really shows up. Excessive brown or black spots in the skin or wool. We'll talk about that. Excessive freckling or pigmented skin on the ears, eyes, nose, and lips. Again, that's black or brown pigmentation. Black or brown spots in the hairline above the hooves to the dew claw in that pastern area. Solid black hooves is absolute disqualification, as is solid black lambs. Surgical alterations other than redocking. Dr. Ramsey talked about the callipy genes, TPIP, or tendency to show a callipy genes, is an absolute disqualification out of the fine wool breed. And then finally, head, ear, or horn shape, non-typical to the fine wool breeds. And we'll show you some examples of that here in a minute, so you can kind of see those examples and get those in your head. Dr. Ramsey, you talked about the wool pattern on sheep. If you look at the picture to the right, when you wash and shear these fine wools, a lot of times you end up with this pattern that's just part of the characteristic that these sheep have. It's not a defined pattern like parallel rows and just straight lines, but you'll see these patterns, and it's almost, it makes a rhyme and reason when you look at it. It's almost like a farmer's cultivated field when you look at it. When you get to noticing on the inconsistency of the wool pattern, showing some characteristics of some medium wool breeds showing up in these fine wools, you look at them and you'll have some consistency in the pattern, but then you get these splotchy areas where it just makes no rhyme or reason the way the wool is grown in, mixed and matched. And that's some things that you're going to want to avoid. It's really hard. I will, tell you that it's really hard to see. A lot of times when you're buying sheep, the sheep have been rough shorn and they're dirty, and it's hard to see the wool pattern. But when you've washed and sheared them, that really shows up, and you'll see that at the shows. In our next slide, I have some really good examples here of what we was talking about, that coarse, chalky white hair on the face. Picture on the left, really distinctive there. You can see around the eye, that hair, it has a distinctive white color to it. It's really, you can tell it's a lot coarser than some of the examples we've seen before. It really shows up more in that white color, white pigment there. And then the example to the right, another good example, you can see the how it's distinct in its color. You can see it's a lot coarser than other wool or hair on the head of this sheep. And then there's another really good example of some dark eyelashes that show up here on this fine wool sheep. In our next slide, here's an example of a black spot. You heard Dr. Ramsey talk about kind of the difference between a black spot and a birthmark. And I guess the biggest takeaway that I can give you to take home and when you're selecting sheep is when you're looking, don't really put too much effort into whether it's a black spot or a birthmark. If there is excessive or just, excessive black spotting, excessive in their size, whether you want to call it the black spot or a birthmark, I'd just advise you just to stay away from that sheep and move on to the next one. Again, there'll be some other sheep out there to purchase, and just be careful of that. Our next slide, really good example, the side view here, the sheep on the left, of excessive eye and nose discoloration. You can see around that eye, really distinct in the brown around the eyelids, and then you can see the black spot on top of the eyelid. Real definite black spot there on his upper lips, and got some brown spotting all around that nose. You can even see some brown freckling there and black freckling on his ears. And then the picture to the right, the front view, close-up view, is just a good example of excessive nose markings on these fine wools that you're going to want to avoid. A lot of these spots will show up when they're young, and will give you a pretty good clue of spots and problems you'll have with as they get older and more mature. In our next slide, again, we got a picture here of excessive black spots in the hairline above the hoof, between the hoof and the dew claw on that pastern area. Same picture as before. That's a pretty excessive size spot right there. He's got two of them, one on each hind leg. Those are things that you can look for early on. And then the picture to the right, clearly visible discoloration of wool there around the hooves from above the hoof line moving up. And then in our final slide here, we got some really good pictures of headshots for you to take a look at. Let's just start from the left and moving over to that direction. Classic example of a non-typical fine wool. This guy's not even close. You look at his head shape, the number one thing that you're going to see, and something I failed to mention, is when you're walking up to the classifier or when you're buying sheep, the first thing you're going to see 99% of the time is the head of that fine wool. And that can tell you a lot. And so if this sheep was walking up to you in a pen, or you was walking it to the classifier, you're going to notice right away the different head shape that this guy has as compared to what we've seen earlier. He's a lot broader through that nose and through that muzzle. You can definitely see the white chalky hair on his face, really coarse looking, the brown around his eyes, ear shape is off, head shape is off, just a lot of characteristics there that are not indicative of the fine wool breed. The guy in the middle here with the arrow pointing to his horn, really good example of a Dorset type horn. These Dorset horns are going to have a lot more curl to them. They're going to be a lot tighter in their spiral and their turn. You can see the rings on this guy's horns that really just kind of shows you that example of those Dorset type influenced horns in the fine wool breed. And then the picture to the right, we got two headshots in there. Really study the guy right here to the left. In the right picture on the left, the one that has, before I forget, he's kind of got some black on his nose. That is from the nose print from the show. The show was probably, this picture was probably taken at a major show. He had just placed, obviously got classified in, and had a nose print, has that ink on his nose, if that's something you're not familiar with. But really look at his horn shape, the way his horns come out of that skull and just kind of have a nice gradual turn to the back and outwards. His head shape is good. I like the way his head is shaped, the way his ears are placed, where his eyes set into his skull, long, narrow muzzle there, correcting his nose shape. And then the guy to his right with, looks like he's a polled sheep, just really incorrect in his head shape, just kind of gives you that characteristic of a Dorset type head. So, you know, you can sit here and study the sheep on either side of the correct fine wool right there in the middle. Really good examples for you to look at. With that, Billy, Dottie, I'm finished up and happy to take any questions.
All right, Mr. Blanick, thank you so much for that. As you can see, folks, a lot to learn about the fine wool breed and the intricacies, horn shape, head shape, and all that, but I know some questions have come in. I'm going to go ahead and pitch it to Dottie.
Yeah, thanks, Billy and Mr. Blanick. Josh, let's talk about the hoof and the pad. So Dr. Ramsey discussed the difference that the pad was toward the bottom and back of the hoof, and then we know what a hoof is. So with that, I have kind of a two-part question. One being, why is black acceptable on the pad and the dew claw, but not the hoof? And then also to kind of follow that up, if there was black on the pad, would that be counted in with or count toward the 1/8 cumulative black surface?
Okay, good question, and something that does need to be discussed. Yes, so the black on the pad and the dew claws comes back from the fine wool breeds, generations and generations of breeding that I talked about at the opening slide. That is a characteristic that they've always had. A lot of people attributed that to bruising. They're walking on those pads, they're hitting those pads. Fine wool sheep, like I said, have been in West Texas in the hill country, walking in the rocks. That's getting hit more. And so the bruising has caused that black pigment to come in those pads. Like was explained before, the pads are the back of the feet. They're a softer type tissue. If you ever picked up a sheep's hoof, you could mash on that pad and it's a softer tissue as opposed to the hard hoof wall that surrounds the hoof. I think the second part of the question there, Dottie, was the black streaking. So it does not, you're correct, we do not count the black pads on the fine wool. So not all of them have it. I just want to be clear that some do and some don't. It is acceptable. But that 1/8 does not constitute the part of the black pad. It starts, again, if you're not familiar with it and you can have access to a sheep, pick up their hooves. It don't matter what breed, and that pad's going to be soft. When you move around to both sides of it and it turns into that harder type tissue, that hoof wall there, that's what starts the hoof wall, and that's where we taking effect that 1/8 total circumference of the hoof and determining if we're less than an 1/8 or more than an 1/8 or excessive. I hope that answered your question.
It definitely does, Josh. Thanks for clarifying that. We have another one that came in on Facebook that I think is a great question and one that we just sometimes overlook or take for granted. And I think it lends itself to being asked here with further clarification. And that's, if a fine wool gets classed out, where does it go? What breed does it go to?
Excellent question. That's something I should have mentioned from the beginning. So when you go to the classifier at any of these shows and you do not get classified, you have some disqualification issues, and you do not get classified into the fine wools, you will be moved into the fine wool cross, because what happens is that fine wool is showing characteristics of a medium wool breed, and a fine wool cross, as Mr. Osborne will talk about here in a minute, is a cross between a fine wool and a medium wool. And so those fine wools that are disqualified go into the fine wool cross.
Excellent. Thanks, Josh. One real last question that I think is going to be pretty quick to answer that we had come in on Zoom is, do you expect that an animal with Dorset type horn or head shape would get classified out even if everything else looks good?
Well, it's kind of like Dr. Ramsey said, it's all subjective and it depends on how severe it is. You know, if it's a really outstanding Dorset type look and shape to it, the horns are distinctive, the head shape is distinctive, then I would tend to say yes. The classifiers are trained to see that. They've seen hundreds of, I mean, thousands of fine wools. They're going to catch that, and then that's showing that medium wool type breeding coming in there. And you want to create a fair playing field for everybody and not allow those sheep in. So yes, you know, if it's just moderate and you can't hardly tell, that's tough, and a lot of people won't even see it. But if it's definite, distinctive, you're sure going to see it. The other thing, real quick, going back on the hoof that I failed to mention is, and there might be some confusion, that's 1/8 of each hoof surface. So if you pick up a hoof and look at it and it's 3/4 or solid black on that, you can't say, well, 3/4 divided by, you know, 4, that's less than the 1/8 on each hoof. Well, that doesn't work. It's 1/8 of each hoof surface. So.
All right, Mr. Blanick. Well, as promised, folks, you got to hear from somebody who grew up in the business. He's also a dad, so he's involved with showing livestock, someone you're going to see at all of our major livestock shows where these classification guidelines are being implemented, and also somebody that has perspective as a judge and show management and lots of different hats he wears in this youth livestock industry. So, Mr. Blanick, thank you again for your time. And again, Mr. Blanick will stick around, as will all of the presenters, for a Q&A at the end. So if Dottie didn't catch your question this last time, we'll all convene back again at the end, and we'll get a chance to tackle your question at that point. But right now, my job is to introduce Mr. Jamie Osborne to you, County Extension Agent in Gillespie County for Agriculture and Natural Resources. Jamie's going to cover the fine wool crosses. If you don't know Jamie, and I bet you do, one of the best livestock guys we have in the entire state of Texas. He's great at hogs. He understands beef cattle, sheep, and goats as well, but also has a really good understanding of the fine wool crossbreed. I know his kids are engaged in that as well. He's going to shed some light on the fine wool crosses. So, Mr. Osborne, take it away if you would.
Well, good afternoon. I'm glad everyone could join us today. We're going to talk about the fine wool crosses here. It's like it says, fine wool crosses. So we're dealing with crossbred animals. So there's a little bit less predictability in them. So there's a wider range of things that we're going to go through in terms of their acceptability. Just because they are crosses, you're taking two purebred animals and breeding them together to get a crossbred lamb. So therefore, causes a little bit wider range in what's acceptable or what we come out with. So we have to have a fine line on each side of that, of what is acceptable and what's not. And I think with these perimeters, we can get in there and find the ones that are going to be true fine wool crosses and work good for our kids whenever we're showing them and also selecting them and doing the things we do with them. So let's get started. Number one, must be a cross with evidence of at least 50% fine wool breeding and the remaining exhibiting predominance of only Hampshire and or Suffolk breeding. A soft pelt, which is characteristic of a half-blood, and you'll see that spinning count there. That's just the quality of the wool. It's 60 to 60s and 62 on a spinning count. If they have those, that's very indicative of it being at least a half-blood. Face and ears should be soft and silky, spotting and or brown face and ears. Spotting and or brown, you'll see that. It used to be the brown face ones had some trouble, but now then if they have a true brown color to them, they're acceptable in this set of guidelines. Number 5, moderate spotting and or brown legs, not extending above the rear flank and the foreflank. Number 6, wool must be present below the hocks on the rear legs. They have to have some wool back there. The front legs, they do not have to have wool. It's not necessary on their front legs, but yes, on their back ones. The reddish rust color legs are acceptable. White-faced and ring-eyed crosses are acceptable if the pelt is acceptable, and long as there are no other discriminatory characteristics are present. And then birthmarks are acceptable also in our fine wool crosses. So let's look at some and see what we got. Here's pictures of 3 of them. Very, very good examples of fine wool cross lambs. You can see their head type, the shape of their eye, the shape of their poll, the way their ear sits on their head. It's wide and it's set slow and has some slope to it. The shape of the ear is really good. And then you go looking at color. They have some spotting there. The one in the middle of the 3, the one on the right side of the left picture has mostly brown, but that's still very acceptable whenever you're talking about a crossbred lamb. And then of course the other 2 have a lot of white and speckling, but they're still have that real good color of brown. They have wool on both front and rear legs, and you look down there and they have that brown color around their feet and legs. Here's some more pictures of acceptable breeds. We talked about the white face cross and or having rings around his eyes and stuff. The one on the left, very good example of that. You still see the breed character of a fine wool cross lamb. You can see it in his eye, you can see it in his ear, the head shape that he has to him. Then you look at his body type, and that one's very acceptable. And like we said, the ring-eyed crosses, and he's a really good example of a white-faced ring-eyed cross that's acceptable. The middle picture shows the red wool, which is also acceptable. Josh even had one in San Antonio, and a lot of people got to see him because he was a champion cross this year, so that was very good for them. But that guy had some red legs, and obviously he was acceptable, so these are acceptable here too. Then on the right, that's just a good example of a fine wool cross. His front leg, you see the brown on his knee, really pretty wool down through there. Then you get down to his foot and his pastern, and it's still brown and has that really good color to it. Next, he's discriminatory breed traits. These are the ones that Dr. Ramsey was talking about, 2 or 3 or 3 strikes and you're out. If they've got 3 or more of these, you're probably in trouble. So let's try to, whenever we're picking them out, make sure we know what these are, and try to work through that and make sure we get crossbred lambs that are going to work for our kids to show. Number 1, excessive black spotting in the skin above the knees in hocks. Number 2 is moderate black or chocolate brown color on the face and ears, including the wool. Number 3 is moderately coarse breech and or harsh pelt. Then number 4 is a moderately coarse chalky white hair on their face, around their eyes, and in their flanks, and down the front of their legs and on their rear legs. So we'll look at some of these right quick. The one on the left, still this is one of our discriminatory traits, but he's getting a lot of darkness up above his knee, a lot of dark speckling up through there. One that you can see barely has any wool on his back legs. I know that's not talked about in this particular slide, but if you'll look, that lamb still has some wool back there, and he's pretty slick-legged up front, but there's still just a tiny bit, so he's acceptable there. He would get looked at pretty hard in terms of the amount of speckling that he has. And then the one on the right, there's another one that has some moderate speckling. You can see that it goes up to his foreflank. It's on the inside of his leg right there. Then even on his right leg, you can see a little bit of spotting on the outside of his knee there, but still in a moderate amount, which is discriminatory. So that means they're going to look and make sure that everything else is right about him. If that's the only thing wrong with him, probably still all right, but they're still going to look at the other characteristics that he has because of that one being discriminatory. Moderate black or chocolate brown face on his color on his face, ears, and legs. That one's getting into the moderate to dark browns on his knee and down there on his pastern up there, but still it's one that's in a discriminatory deal. Then we get to looking at our lamb on the right. There's one with a solid color. Is that dark enough? You know, that's one of those objective things that our classifiers have to look at to determine whether he's too dark brown or he's dark brown, but that solid color should be fine. Next is another one of the coarse breech pictures. In our fine wool crosses, there's some lambs that try to get shown that are 3/4 bloods. And whenever you get into 3/4 bloods or lambs with more medium wool in them, that bridge will get coarse, and which causes a more open wool pattern and a more uneven wool pattern. So when you're looking at this guy's hip right here, you can see that it's not a very even wool pattern, and also the wool is more open, so it's not a real good fine wool pelt or hide to him because of the openness of his wool and the uneven pattern there. Moderately coarse chalky white hair on the face and the flanks and down the front legs and our rear legs. The guy on the left there is one that has that real coarse white chalky hair around his eye, above his eye and below his eye there. And then the one in the middle is a really good picture of one that's getting chalky hair up there on his legs. And you can see that that's a really good picture there, that coarse white chalky hair, like Josh said, like an old man hadn't shaved in 3 or 4 days. That's what that kind of looks like right there. And it's a very good picture of that. And then the one on the far right is another one that whenever they get the coarse chalky white hair on the face, it'll come back to their poll and even a little bit past their poll. So it's another good sign that they've got something else in them whenever they got that coarse chalky white hair to them. So he'll get looked at pretty hard. Absolute disqualification. These are the ones that if they have one, probably not a good thing. So if we're selecting them and buying them, we want to really pay attention to these characteristics, because if they have one, probably not going to get to be in the fine wool cross show. Number one, excessive black or dark chocolate brown color on their face, ears, and legs, and including their wool. Excessively coarse breech and or harsh pelt. Number three, excessive coarse chalky white hair on the face and in the flanks and down the front legs or rear legs. Total absence of wool on their rear legs. Saw a decent picture of that earlier. That guy just has a tiny bit, so if he gets less than that, where they have zero wool back there, it's not a good thing. Black lambs can't show in the fine wool crosses. Evidence of other breeds, including but not limited to Dorset and the Southdown breed types. Their head and ear shape of a Dorset and or Southdown. Number 7, surgical alterations other than redocking, and then the Calipes gene is also in the fine wool cross deal where it's not acceptable. Here's a picture of excessive black and or dark chocolate brown on his face, ears, and legs. On the left, that one's getting really dark, and then his wool is also really dark up there on his front leg. But if you look below there from his pasture, but in his pasture and from his dew claw of the ground, that's getting really dark, getting pretty black up there on his knee also. And on the far right is another one that has a solid color pattern of a dark face. You can see that that lamb's just, there's lots wrong with that. His color is the main thing what we're showing right here. But his eye's not right, his poll's not right, the shape of his face isn't right, and his ear isn't right either. So he's got lots of issues going on, but this is really a good picture of one whose color isn't right also. Excessive coarse chalky white hair on his face and in his flanks and down the front legs or his rear legs. And this is a really good picture of one that's got that coarse white chalky hair up there above his eye. But if you look below his eye, it's also there. And then if you'll kind of veer to the right and let's start going over the bridge of his nose, you can see white, coarse, chalky hair all over that guy. So he's got some major issues in terms of the white and that coarse, chalky hair, and that's probably not a good thing. Here is our last slide in the crossbred deal, and it's evidence of other breeds, including but not limited to Dorset and Southdown breed types with their head and ear shape, and of the Dorset and our Southdown. The guy on the far left is a really good example of a Southdown cross. He's got that color, he's got the shape of the bridge of his nose, the shape of his eye, his ear, all that reads in terms of having some other type of breed in him other than Hampshire or Suffolk, and that one probably has some Southdown in him just by his breed type and the way his ear set is and the shape of his head. The one in the middle is another good example of probably one that's not going to get into the fine wool breed most of the time because of the Dorset influence that he has in him. If you look at his eye shape, it's not indicative of a true fine wool cross. That long narrow muzzle is not the way that's supposed to be put in him either. And then if you look at his ear shape, his ear set on his head, he's got a real small pointed ear. And then his ear set is real high and it's real pointed and it sticks up and out, and that's not real indicative of a fine wool cross. The guy on the far right is one that we had earlier, but that's a really good example of a fine wool cross lamb. Just that guy, when he's walking up to you, you can see that he has the typical ear set, ear shape, the shape of his eye, the width of his poll, the width of his muzzle that he comes down through there with, and a lamb that's a really good example. So if you can buy one looks like that, should be pretty safe in the fine wool cross breed. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions? Or Dottie and Billy, thank y'all.
You bet, Mr. Osborne. Thank you. And just to take away, everybody just needs to go find that lamb on the right and buy him. That makes it real easy. But it's not that easy. There's lots of give and take. Things are subjective, as we've covered. But I know some questions have been coming in. Dottie's got us for that.
Yeah, thanks, Billy. And thanks, Mr. Osborne. Jamie, I was thinking we've been talking a lot about chalky hair all over the face and legs, and I'm starting to think that maybe it just would have been easier for y'all to turn your cameras on and we would see some guys with some chalky hair that hasn't been shaved in a few days. But nonetheless, lots of good explanation. Thankful for you going through all that with a lot of clarity. But we're about midway through, so I want to remind everybody on Facebook Live and here on Zoom to be commenting your questions. On Facebook, that's as easy as just typing in a comment. Ask us a question and we'll get to it either now during the breed or at the end when we get to the question and answer session. On Zoom, it is a little button in the bottom of your screen that has 2 comment bubbles and a Q&A. And that's exactly what it is. Just type your question there and we'll get to them. Billy, at the beginning of our time together, we asked folks to comment where they're watching from, what their favorite breed is. And folks are with us. We have over 170 folks watching with us. And so lots of folks listening and learning a lot along with us. And so we have folks watching from all across the state: Fredericksburg, Deaf Smith County, Coleman, Borden County, and so on. We even have folks who are currently out lamb shopping and are tuning in with us. So I know that they're getting real-time knowledge as they go down the road looking for good ones for this year. But Jamie, I have a question that came in, and it deals with the color of our fine wool crosses. We talk about things being, sometimes maybe too much white or too much dark, and we talk about chocolate and all these things. Can you describe with a little more clarity the ideal brown color we're looking for the fine wool crosses?
Well, that's a very good question. That is also a difficult question because whenever we're looking at color, it's all subjective, right? So we can go from one that I might think's too dark, that the guy that's classifying says, well, he's chocolate brown, so he's okay. So that is a hard question to answer. If you'll look at the brown on the guy on the right, on the current picture that we have up here right now, slide, that guy has a really good brown color to him. It's not too dark. It's not one of those light colored ones, but it's a darker brown, but it's still doesn't have any indication at all of being black to it. It's a true brown color. It can range from there. It could even maybe get just a tiny bit darker than that guy to also to a lighter brown, even to the point where over like on the Southdown cross lamb, the brown that's on his nose area, that's obviously a lighter brown than the one on the far right. But even at that guy with that, just the color now, not talking about anything else on him, the color up there over the bridge of his nose towards the end of it by his nostrils and stuff, that's probably an acceptable brown to me. So, I mean, there's a wider range there. And because of using Suffolk bucks, Hampshire bucks, that's why that color has more variation to it when we're talking about a crossbred lamb. So, I mean, those guys are, have tons and tons of different genetics in them. So we get some variation in the brown. You know, you got a higher percentage Hampshire buck, maybe not have as darker brown lambs as a higher percentage Suffolk buck. So that's why that variation is so wide. So, but I would say if we're going to have to pick an ideal color, which is really hard because it's, again, those three guys out there throwing chips are the ones that's going to determine what color their brown is acceptable. But I would say the one on the right, if we could stay somewhere close to him in terms of that color, you'd be doing real good. That was a little long, but sorry, that's a difficult question.
That's all right. Great explanation there, Jamie. Last question for you. And I think it's one that maybe a lot of us have a little trouble with. I know I might, you know, we're not too familiar with the Dorset breed. It's not one that we show quite a bit here in Texas. So I just want to go back to that. And I know you said we have a good example of it in the one in our picture in the middle of the screen here. Can you point out really quickly just the certain characteristics about the head shape, about the eyes, and maybe about the ear set that would lend that to being a Dorset influence type of animal, and the characteristics that would be discriminatory or absolute disqualification there?
Sure. Again, you're getting in, but if you've seen enough Dorset crosses, it's easy to pick out, and that's the great benefit that we have of having the people that have the experience to do our classifying at these major shows. Most of those guys, all those guys, can honestly pick one of them out in a hurry when they're out there classifying. But this guy in the middle, let's talk about him. If you'll look at his ear set as compared to the one on the right, you can see that it's higher up on his head. It's closer to the top part of his poll. And whenever he's looking at you, that lamb's ears will actually go straight out and up. So from the side, he'll be real perky eared, I guess you would say. And if you were looking at a true fine wool cross, his ears will go either from straight out and have a little bit of a downward slope to it because they're set lower on his head. Instead of being even with his poll, they're going to be set just a little bit lower on his head. So whenever he does look at you, his ears are either going to go straight out or have just a little bit of a downward turn to them. So that's one way of seeing the Dorset ear set. When you're talking about ear shape, their ears tend to be a little bit narrower made, and they also get more pointed than a fine wool cross lamb will. And then on their eyes tends to sit on a Dorset cross, will sit real high on their head and be real round and kind of sit on the outside of their head, is the best way I can describe that. If you're talking about a true fine wool cross, their eye is kind of set back in their head a little bit, and it has a different shape to it. Where a Dorset cross will have a big round eye and it's sitting kind of like a bullfrog, sits out on the outside of his skull. Fine wool crosses don't do that. And then also they tend to be a little bit stouter muzzled, a fine wool cross will, where a Dorset will have that long, narrow muzzle. Like if you can remember back to the fine wool pictures, the guy on the far left, when they talk about head shape and stuff, that guy has a really good example. And if you have a chance to go back and look at that, look at his eye shape and set, how it sets on the outside of his head. And he's got that long, narrow face that winds down to a kind of a narrow pointed muzzle. And this guy in the middle, if we could turn him to the side, you could see that in him. We can even kind of see it, how the bridge of his nose gets real narrow right there. And the guy that's a true fine wool cross on the right has that real masculine muzzle to him and comes down to some width through his nostril. Hope that did it some justice.
That did, man. You took us through the eye and the head and all that. There's a lot to think about when it comes to the fine wool cross, and it's not just one breed. It's a combination of multiple breeds, Mr. Osborne. So as promised, just an excellent livestock gentleman who understands these things inside and out. Again, Jimmy's going to hang around with us to the end. So if you have a specific question for him, go ahead and go ahead and submit that question. We'll address that later. But at this time, I'm proud to go ahead and move on to the Southdowns and introduce you to Mr. Patrick Paget of Fredericksburg ISD. teaches there at the high school, has a huge successful program, very engaged in the sheep industry, and today he's going to bring us to Southdown. So, Patrick, if you would, take it away.
Sure. Thank you very much. It's good to be here this evening to be able to talk a little bit about what I think is probably the most traditional of all of our breeds, and that's the Southdown. They are the foundation of all of our medium wool breeds that we know of in the United States. And as we talk about it in terms of the show animals or the show sheep in Texas, I think we've seen a dramatic increase in the amount of Southdowns being exhibited, and I think we can attribute that to the amount of hard work the breeders have put in to make them better, but also those young people that are getting started showing. They're usually a little bit smaller, making them a little bit better for those younger showmen that maybe aren't quite as big that can handle a black. So saying that, as they've gotten more and more popular, there's been some discrepancy and some differences in some of our breed characters. And so it's good for us to get these descriptions out. So as we start buying our lambs for this year, hopefully we'll get those that can classify just fine. So for with our Southdowns, number one would be hair color on the muzzle. Should be mouse colored, gray to brown, and match the color on the legs and pasterns. Number two, nostril pigmentation may be black to purplish gray. Number three, head and muzzle should be broad and proportional to the body. Four, the head of moderate length in proportion to the body. Number five, ears of moderate length in proportion to the body and covered with short hair or wool. Number six is black hooves. 7 is slight chalk around the eyes, and 8 is slight chalk around the muzzle. And the chalk in Southdowns is the same as the other breeds, as we talk about chalk being that white, wiry, bristly hair that you will see around the eyes and muzzle and some of the other portions of the body. And number 9, spots or speckles in the skin only when shorn. Those are acceptable. Here's a really good example of lambs here that you're looking at it when they're young. And the question might be, well, when I look at this lamb here, I'm a little worried about his leg color. As Southdowns are babies and you're picking them at a few months of age, you may be concerned with the color of this lamb's leg from his knee down to his pastern and from his hock down his pastern. When they're young like this, it's going to be that darker chocolate brown color that we would find discriminatory as they get older. But all these Southdowns, as they age, that color will certainly get lighter and should not concern you at all. The other good things about this lamb, as we look at him, the 2 pictures on the left, his muzzle's broad and wide. His ears are fuzzy and located in an acceptable part of his head. His nose pigmentation is dark, black to that purple color. And you look down at his feet, the color of the hair and wool right around his feet matches that there of his muzzle. So that lamb there on the left, I think it's the same lamb in both pictures, is what they should look like when you're picking them out. The lamb here on the right is an excellent picture of when we say a broad muzzle, a short muzzle, of what they should look like. This one is excellent in terms of his length from his nostril to his eye. He's really short in his head. He's also real deep there in his jawline. We've given him that really good traditional Southdown look. Other acceptable breed traits that we're looking for, as you can tell here, relating the picture on the left in the middle to the lamb we just looked at as a baby, you can tell that that leg wool is going to lighten up and it's going to be almost a white wool color with some brown tinge to that, and that's what we're looking for as they mature out. Then you look at that correct hoof color on the right. That one's all solid black, and that's what we're looking for them to be acceptable. Discriminatory. Again, these are the ones which you're looking at. You're going to have multiple of these to be kicked out. And if the question gets asked, the Southdowns will go to the medium wools because they are considered a medium wool breed. But number 1, solid white color or dark chocolate color on the muzzle. We're looking for that color, that mousy color that's in between. We don't want them too dark and we don't want them too white. And we've got some examples of that. Number 2, coarse britch and or harsh pelt. Number 3, predominantly pink nose with few black spots. Long, narrow muzzle is number 4. Excessive black pigmentation on the ears. Number 6, excessive ear length, not in proportion to the head. This is a common problem. Number 7, no hair or wool on the ears. Number 8, skers. Number 9, absence of wool between the scur area. Number 10, striped hooves. Number 11, reddish rust-colored hair above hoof or hoof to pastern. And number 12, black fibers in the wool outside of the birthmark. And number 13, birthmarks. So here's some examples of some discriminatory characteristics that might get you classified out. The solid white color or dark chocolate color on the muzzle. These are the two extremes that we want to steer clear of. The white chalky muzzle there on the left, obviously leaning more towards some Dorset influence in this particular animal. You can tell he's really, really light and white. If you were to touch that hair would probably be pretty coarse and rough. On the other side there, we've got a lamb that's probably got a little more Hampshire influence in him. That color is a little too dark, and just the coloration is not consistent of what we'd find in a Southdown. And I think if you look, that one's actually got just a little bit of speckling there in his ears and there along his wool channel, which is certainly what we'd want to stay away from. Coarse breech in our harsh pelt, same picture we've seen. It's the same characteristic. We don't want in the Southdown. That's an excellent picture here to see right up there where that front leg meets the chest floor. That's where you'll see a lot of that chalky hair, harsh pelt there. You can also look at it there on the breech, as you notice in the other species or the other breeds, probably a little bit easier to see in the fine wools and the fine wool crosses. But Southdown certainly have that same issue that we're trying to steer clear of. Predominantly pink nose with black few spots. These are probably the ones that you can find the easiest when they're lambs that you really need to pay attention to when you're selecting lambs. Don't be afraid to walk up there and just look at that nose and see if it's good shape in terms of being black or dark pigmented. These two are not. The one on the left has a few black spots and the rest of it's really, really light pink. And then the one on the right is solid pink, and we need to steer clear of those when we're selecting them. Long, narrow muzzle. The one on the left, slick ears, middle and traditional, and the one on the right there is good. So the extended muzzle, the one there on the left, he's just got a really long muzzle that's not broad enough right there where his forehead would start, where his muzzle would go into his forehead. Gets real narrow there. You can see his eyes real easily, which kind of also indicates that muzzle is too narrow. You look up over his poll and you've got some dark fiber there. Ears aren't quite right. Also, the one in the middle's got the chalky color there along his muzzle, and his ears, you can tell, just don't have a lot of hair or wool on them. Then you look at the little lamb there on the right. That's what we really want them to look like, is having that good color, that good muzzle pigmentation, and that fuzzy ear. Excessive black pigmentation on the ears. This one can be challenging to see if there's a lot of wool on those lambs. So feel free to search down in there and look and make sure there's not any excessive pigmentation there in the skin. And as if they were to lose their ear wool or hair, that pigmentation will come out and certainly could cause a problem classifying. This is one here. The ear length and being proportionate or not proportionate to the head is one that's come around a little bit. You've got to make sure those ears are short is what we want them to be. We don't want them too long, but more importantly, we want them to be proportional to the head size. And that's certainly something the classifiers have to make a decision on. If that lamb is a little bit bigger, so can his ears be, but as long as they're proportionate to the head size of that lamb. No hair or wool on the ears. This one's pretty easy. If they are lambs and they don't have wool on their ears or hair on their ears, it's probably one you want to pass up. They usually don't grow it as they get older. And so always want to try to steer clear of that. And if one develops that problem as they get older, you may be having some trouble getting your lambs classified. Reddish rust-colored hair above the hoof to pastern. We want to steer clear of that. And a lot of times, if you can get some good leg wool and leg hair, you're not going to have an issue with that. But yeah, we want to steer clear of that reddish brown tint above the hoof, all the way above the hoof and pastern. We got to be careful that we want it to be that nice mousy to chocolate brown color we talked about that's acceptable for their muzzle. Birthmarks. This one's challenging. to say you're going to find us a lot in Southdowns, particularly from their joints down, their pasterns and knees down, and maybe up around their face. So we need to be careful with those, that they're not excessive. And also, if that's the only problem they have, they should be okay. But definitely something to be paying attention to around their feet and on their legs when you're selecting those lambs. Absolute disqualifications. Number 1, speckle-faced ears or legs. Number 2 is horns, white hooves. Number 4, intentional alteration of hair color or skin pigmentation. Number 5, total pink pigmentation of nostrils. Number 6, black lambs. Number 7, surgical alterations other than redocking. And number 8, and this one has become prevalent in the Southdowns, steep hip or tendency to show callipage, and so we need to steer clear of those. So here's some examples of what we would say are absolute disqualifications. You can see the speckling there in that lamb's face there, right there, what we'd call the wool channel there between the eye and the nose. You can see some dark pigmentation or speckling there that we'd want to steer clear of. And then you look there on the lamb to the right there on the edge of his nose and nostrils there, you can see that speckling there that we'd like to steer clear of, not to mention that one got a pretty big pink nose with just a few black spots on it also. Pink pigmentation of nostrils, this one's pretty straightforward. This is one that can be picked out pretty easily when they're little. And so to really steer clear of that, just that pink nose, it has to be that dark, obviously black, or sometimes when they're little, as long as it's that purplish color, usually those tend to get darker as they get older. Steer clear of those that are extremely pink. As we wrap up the Southdowns, appreciate the time to share this with you guys. There are some things to think about when you are selecting these lambs, just some short things to look at. Make sure to look at that nose, make sure it's the right color in terms of the pigmentation. Try to pay attention to that ear length, and then of course in the color of their face, and then the color of their wool and hair right above their feet. So those will hopefully help you select the good ones that will classify when you get them to the shows later in the year.
Great advice right there, Patrick. And I know, Dottie, I can't believe this, but we're well on our way to being through a great training and sharing some great information with the folks out there. I know the questions keep coming in, so I'm going to get out of your way and let you attack those.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Paget. And we do have some good questions coming in from a real attentive audience, but just want to remind you that you're more than welcome to submit those questions throughout our time together. And whether we address those now during the time of the breed it's asked of, or at the end, we're going to get to them. So get those questions in. If you're on Zoom, you can do that at the bottom of the screen with the 2 comment bubbles, and you'll put your question in there and we'll get to it. Or if you're on Facebook and watching us live there, you can just comment your question and we'll get it there as well. Mr. Paget, you really did a great job of talking about the color and the differences, but color is something that just keeps coming up, and it's something that a lot of us have a question on. So I guess if you could, do you mind describing a little bit more about that mousy color we're looking for? And, that's a funny word that we attribute it to, but I think it lends itself to a little bit more clarification if you could, as compared to the darker or chocolate brown color that would be a discriminatory factor.
Sure, I'll do my best. Again, this I feel like Mr. Osborne here when we talk about color. To me, you just really want to steer clear of those lambs that when you look at them, and you have to question if they're too light colored in terms of being very white. That's probably where we're getting to the point where that's being way too chalky and too light colored in terms of just their wool and their coloring around their face. The opposite end of that is if you're looking at a lamb that runs through there, if you're picking them out and you're not really sure if they're a Hampshire or medium wool, or if they're a Southdown, that's probably telling you they're too dark. And so in terms of trying to give you an exact color, I just like to say more gray and that mousy colored. It will keep you in that good range that you shouldn't have any issues.
Excellent. I appreciate you going over that a little bit more. We really don't have too many questions on Southdowns. Lots of folks are commenting that they love to show them. I'm sure some folks are picking them out right now. Again, folks, if you have any questions on Southdowns, get them in via Zoom or via Facebook, and we'll address those near the end of our time together. But with that, Billy, let's keep moving on.
All right. Well, if I know the Southdown people, there's going to be some questions coming back in. But Mr. Paget, thank you for your time walking us through the Southdown breed and just kind of talking about some of those small things that people should be looking for when they're out there right now on the road. Talk to people every day that are out shopping. I'll be making my way out west later in the week as well. So just great information y'all are sharing. You are no exception, sir. So thank you for your time. And again, Mr. Paget, along with all of our other presenters, are going to be sticking around towards the end of our presentation. And let's have them there to share their expertise as those questions come in from Facebook, potentially a little bit delayed. We'll be sure to try to answer those best we can. But moving on to the Dorpers, making their way onto the scene relatively recently and working their way into our major livestock shows and definitely taking a hold of our industry here in Texas, have become a very, very important part. And boy, do we have a treat for you to address the Dorper breed and none other than Mr. Brad Rader, County Extension Agent there in Gillespie County, and has a vast knowledge regarding this breed, raises them, shows them, has been around them longer than anybody I can remember, and he's just going to do us a superb job here. So, Brad, if you would, take away the Dorpers.
All right. Thank you, Billy, and a pleasure to be on here with all of y'all. And, of course, we saved the best for last, and my thoughts on that. As Patrick said, we started out with one of the oldest breeds in the Southdowns, and we're going to move on to one of the newest breeds here in the Dorper world. Just to give you a little history about the Dorper, they were imported from South Africa in the early 1990s in the United States, and they kind of took a backseat to the boar goats for a while. If all of y'all remember that, the boar goat industry was really hot and really strong at that time. And so just the last probably 10 years, they've seen a drastic increase here in the United States. The Dorper is a cross breed. It's a cross between a horned Dorset and a black-headed Persian, and that's where we get what we consider our Dorpers. And in our white Dorpers, there's some speculation that maybe there were some other breeds from South Africa that were maybe put into that, but they still kind of say a horned Dorset and a black-headed Persian is what made those as well. Anyway, so let's get on to the Dorper standards. And number one, they must be a Dorper or white Dorper. Number two, the conformation, long, deep, wide body with well-sprung ribs and excellent muscling. Number three, this is kind of where we made some changes to the standards over the last ones. We got a little more critical on color. And Dorper, which must be a white sheep with a black head, limited to neck, head, neck, and forequarter, not below the knee or behind the heart girth. And then a white Dorper is just pretty much a white sheep. Number four, must have at least 1/3 hair, primarily on the belly, forearm, and breech. Number five, 100% hair below the knee and hocks. 6, 100% hair forward of the pole. Number 7, moderate sized ears with no wool covering. Number 8, head should be strong, bold with a deep jaw. Number 9, polled or small horns or scurs. Number 10, spots or speckling pigment in the skin only when shorn. And number 11, black spots above the hoof line and below the dew claw. So, all right, so here's two really acceptable Dorpers. As we look at this, the black Dorper is there on the left-hand side of the screen. This black Dorper has really good color. As we talked about in those rules, he's got a stout head. It's got an appropriate set to his ears and length to his ears. He's wide made. You can view that all the way through him. And then he's got a good hair and wool mix, as a lot of our rules talk about. We look over there to the white Dorper. Again, we just got a solid white sheep there and many of the same attributes that we found in the Dorper on the left-hand side. Next slide. So this is where a lot of controversy, or not controversy, but things you really need to look at when we look at the Dorper breed. The Dorper has some different genes that'll pop out, and they do have some wool in that breed, and they're actually considered a shedding breed. And so if you can see this picture in the middle, you can actually see that lamb has shedded off some of that wool there in the middle. And then we do have what we consider a hair gene, and we will get some sheep that'll be twins, and they'll have a lot of hair. One will have a lot of hair, and then the next one will look like this and be probably about 2/3 wool and 1/3 hair. So some of the things when we start looking at where we're going to find the correct hair and wool combination is definitely in that underline. And if we look at the picture right there in the middle, we can see the forearm of the sheep. Half of that is solid hair down there in its forearm, and then the top part going up is wool. As we look in its flanks, we have good evidence of hair. And sometimes you have to get these animals in the correct sunlight. We have to get the right sunlight on them or the right lights on them to really see that hair and have it pop. And so on both the flanks there, we see a lot of hair. Then if we look at the picture at the far right, when we get back to the breech, we've talked about that in the fine wools and the crosses, and it's pretty evident here in the Dorpers too. We're going to get a coarser type hair back there in that breech. And you're going to see, as we, even in the picture in the middle at the bottom, I think highlights it a little better. As we're down close to the hock, we're going to have more hair down there. It's going to be longer and straggler. As we move up through that breech all the way up there to the rump, it's going to almost be full hair. So these are some things that we need to look at, and this ewe is very acceptable. All right, so now we're going to look at some pigments and spotting in the skin. And to me, this is also a new rule because we've added a lot more color, and it's probably where we're going to have some areas where the classifiers are going to have to make some judgment calls on. One thing I want to warn you is a lot of times you're not going to see this pigmenting in the skin or even some spots that come through in the wool as we have a lamb that isn't sheared. The picture to the far right, that is just a sheared strip. You can see the wool up in the top hand corner. And then as we look in the part that's sheared there, that lamb has some pigment. Obviously, this is not coming through the fiber. You can still see white fibers in those pigments, but it's something we need to be aware of. The lamb on the far left and in the center probably has a mix. He's probably got a lot of pigment in that skin that's not coming through the fibers, but then he also has some dark spots there where it is coming through. And so we need to be aware of that. Now, the spot on his shoulder is not going to be added up into his color. We're going to go over that a little bit later, but that spot is in front of the heart girth. And so that spot is not considered part of the total amount of color that he is allowed. Let's move on to the next slide, please, Billy. All right, as we get into Dorper breed, one of the rules that we wrote in there, I think it's rule 11, is we can have some spotting in between the dew claw and the hoof line. And this is a very good picture of what you're going to see. This probably spot is getting a little larger. It's getting up above that dew claw. And so this is acceptable. Now, if all 4 feet down there are almost black, then we're probably getting a little excessive. But we are allowed some spots down there on black-headed Dorpers to have some spots between the dew claw and the hoof line. So now as we move on to the discriminatory breed traits, we're looking at number 1, a tall, leggy, shallow, or narrow-bodied lamb. Number 2, here's the color deal coming in, a limited amount of dark fibered spots on the body and underline behind the heart girth, not to exceed a cumulative total size of a softball. Number 3, a white sheep with brown or red colored speckles in the covering confined to the head and neck. Number 4, a tricolored sheep. Number 5, excessive wool covering more than 2/3 of the body. Number 6, wool forward of the poll. Number 7, heavy horns. Number 8, long pendulous ears. And number 9, a long narrow muzzle. So here's our spotting behind the heart girth, and we kind of limit this to the size of a softball. That's a picture of a ewe on the left, but she has a black spot back there just below her reproductive areas. And this is very common in the Dorper breed. Excuse me. They wanted to make sure that there was pigmentation on those skin spots back there on the anus and on the vulva. And so the Dorper breed actually allows some extra coloration back there to go out into the other parts of the sheep. And this is a very good example of a ewe that has a black spot back there. We're also going to see some on wethers kind of down around the navel area or up around the testicles. Of course, those testicles will be removed, but that's some spots where you might want to pay attention to. As we look at the lamb go back one, sorry, Billy. As we look at the lamb on the right, he's got that black spot down there underneath between his hock and his twist. This is getting kind of probably to the size of a softball, so those classifiers are going to have to make that decision. Here's a tricolored sheep, and this is a lot more evident in person. We've got, as we improve this breed, and we even in the full blood in the pure blood industry, they're allowed to crossbreed these animals and keep breeding them back to Dorpers to get what we consider a pure blood. But as we do that, we maybe introduce some Katahdin or something else, and so we might end up with a tricolored breed. This one here has some brown, a lot of brown on his ears. We're also going to see Dorpers maybe have a little brown tinge around their eyes. That can be kind of common. So I think the classifiers will let a little brown go around the eyes. But when we start seeing it in other areas, they're really going to start paying attention to it. Now here's one that's getting close on excessive wool covering more than 2/3 of the body. This is a fall-born ewe lamb here that I did take a picture of, and I just want to be critical that most fall-born animals have more wool. They're born during the winter. They come through the winter time, so they're going to have more wool covering down there. As we shear this ewe off one time, or she sheds off her first time, she's going to lose a lot of that wool coloring, and so there's going to be less wool down there typically. If we would zoom in on the belly of this ewe, you can see some hair, and it's a hair wool mix down there. As we look at her forearm, she's got just right there above her knee, there's solid hair there for just a little bit. And then as we look back there in her breech, you can tell that breech is a different kind of texture than the wool up on her rump or there on her side. As we shear this ewe to the right, you're going to see if we get crazy with our surgicals and really peel these Dorpers down, sometimes you're going to shear all that evidence away. But probably my best indicator is right there on the forearm. We're still going to see some hair coming up in that forearm. As we look in her flanks, we can still see some hair there. As we get back on the breech, because it's a lot more hair wool mix, we're going to be a little harder to tell back there. All right, here's a long, narrow muzzle. And so we don't want that in the Dorper breed, or that's not really characteristic of the Dorper breed. So we're going to look for that. As you can see, this looks a lot like that fine wool. When we talked about the fine wools and the crosses, they've got that real narrow muzzle up there, and maybe the influence of something else coming into this breed. All right, here's the absolute disqualifications. All wool or very little evidence of hair on the belly, form, or breech. Number 2, wool below the knee and hocks. Number 3, wool on the ears. Number 4, excessive amounts of dark fibered spots on the body and underline, behind the heart girth, and exceeding a cumulative of the size of a softball. Number 5, solid brown, red, or rust-colored head. Number 6, speckling or spots from the knee to the dew claw, or from the hock to the dew claw. We don't have a picture of this one. I just want to talk about this just a little bit. Back when we first got started, there were some crossbred animals, and not that anybody was trying to cheat, but for some reason there was quite a few of them coming out with that speckling between the knee and the dew claw, or the hock and the dew claw, and we saw a lot of that. So this rule's in there. We don't see a lot of that in the sheep that are walking in the ring today, and that's a good thing. Also, number 5, we'll go back up to that. We don't have a picture of that. A solid brown, red, or rust-colored head used to be acceptable. As we cross some of these, or not cross, but as we breed some of these Dorpers, every once in a while we'll get a red head or a rust-colored head pop out. A lot of times these sheep get really light as they grow out, but that is something to be concerned about there. Then number 7, strong breed characteristics of breeds other than Dorper or white Dorper. Number 9, surgical alterations other than redocking. And number 10, evidence of hip or tendency to show the Calipese gene. And then number 10, color or evidence of color alteration. Next slide. All right, here's a picture. Hard to see, but man, if you find wool below the knee and hock, that's just one to stay away from. I think that'll probably get you kicked out of the Dorper breed about as fast as anything. Now here's one, again, this is the one that we need to talk about a little bit more, and probably going to be up to the discretion of the classifiers just a little bit here. We talked about the heart girth, and as we look at the picture to the far left, this lamb has actually 3 things, or actually 4 things wrong with him. One, he's got, if we look at the heart girth right there where that arrow is, that black is extending behind that, and that's way more than a softball, even if that was all he had. Then as you look at his front leg, he's got black extending from the knee all the way down to his dew claw. So that right there would be pretty much a disqualification. Then if we look at the black paint in his flank there, way more than the size of a softball. So all 3 of those right there, if they was just singularly on that lamb, would be enough to get him. Then if we look at him, he also has some black spots on him. And this sheep has probably the size of a penny or a quarter there. And so if those added up to more the size of a softball, then we would definitely have to look at that. And Billy, as some of the other participants were, or speakers were talking, I just did a little rough calculation there. You know, the size of a softball is pretty evident to see. But as we look at these spots and try to add them up, I guess I had the question, well, how many quarter-size spots does it take? And how many penny-size spots does it take? And we might need to double check my math. It's been a long time since I've had geometry, but we Googled some stuff and it looked like about 10 to 15 of the size of a quarter and about 20 to 25 the size of a penny will make up the size of a softball. Again, that's some rough calculation. We probably want to check that and to go on down the road. Now, one thing about that lamb on the right, I've looked at enough of that lamb almost looks like he's solid hair. And so don't let that throw you away. If he's solid hair and has everything else Dorper, if that color's wrong, they're still going to get you. The lamb in the middle also specifically just has the black there in the flank. That's going to get him. The rest of him in terms of color looks pretty good. Now, as we get over to the wether on the right, this is one that has some black pigment and also has that does not come through the wool. As you can see, that lighter blue there, it almost looks blue a lot of times when you shear these lambs. And then he's also got some black spots, some black fibers that's coming through. I've seen sheep like this. This lamb is loaded up with those black spots, but it's amazing. If they've got about an inch of wool on them, you're really going to have to shear them sometimes to see those black spots. And so if you buy some lambs in the wool, you might just put the caveat in there that, hey, if I get home and shear this guy out and he's loaded with black spots, I need to bring him back or get my money back or do something else. So again, this is the what we changed a lot here on the Dorpers goes to this slide. Next slide, Billy. Well, we're done with the Dorpers, and we want to definitely thank all the shows that have put this breed in over the past couple of years. And just like the Boer Goats, I was there for the infancy of that. It took us a long time to get some sales slots for Boer Goats, and now we have, or for market wethers, and now we have plenty of sales spots at all the shows. And so I know the shows, those sales spots are very coveted, and they're going to do their best to work us in some more sales spots as our breed grows. And so we do want to thank all the shows for the amount of sales spots that we do have, and just a little patience, a little time, and we'll get there with the rest of the breeds. Billy, we got any questions, or Dottie?
Yeah, Brad, first of all, I need you to do some more math. Go ahead and get in there and figure out how many poker chips it takes to make a softball and give those classifiers kind of a gauge so they can just kind of put those on the animal's body. Do not do that. That's just a joke. That would definitely slow down classification. And Dottie, don't let me slow this down. What are the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't know we were bargaining for both a Dorper lesson and a math lesson, but I know the folks at home are thankful for both. Brad, we have lots of good questions related to Dorpers. I know you're excited to hear that we have lots of folks who are saying that they love showing Dorpers and just lots of energy around them. So first question I have for you is, if you were to mate a Dorper and a white Dorper, would offspring display acceptable coloration?
I'm going to say yes, and this goes back to something we really talked about with the standards. We used to have the cross in that first line there, a Dorper or a white Dorper cross. And if we're truly crossing full blood or pure blood Dorpers and white Dorpers, the majority of the time we're going to come out with a white sheep or a goggle-eyed sheep or possibly even a black-headed sheep. The problem is we've all bred up our herds. You know, there used to not be a Dorper ewe on every corner. So we all had mongrel herds, is what I call them, running around. And so we take a white sheep and breed it to a black-headed ram, not maybe knowing the ancestry of either one. And that's where we're going to get a lot of our paints and our sheep that aren't going to classify. So, but yes, if we do breed a Dorper to a white Dorper, you know, and again, it just depends. Even though they are full bloods, I have seen a lot of paints come out of those, but I have seen a lot of lambs that would classify.
Good deal, Brad. Another question we have is related to size. So we know that typically Dorpers are moderate in size. So the question is there an upper weight limit for these animals? If so, or why not?
Right now, the only place that has an upper weight limit is San Antonio. They put in a 140-pound weight limit. And the Dorper breed is considered to be, and this just goes back maybe not to the classification standards, but just to the breed itself. It is kind of considered an early maturing breed. It doesn't typically get to the weights, especially in the commercial industry, that our other breeds do, probably kind of similar to a Southdown. And so they're designed to finish on grass. And so if we get an animal that's real large in size and stature, they're not going to do real good on grass. They're not going to be that early maturing that we can breed those ewe lambs or breed the ewe lambs and get a lamb out of them, which we like to do in the commercial industry. And so that's maybe one of the pushes to put a weight limit, and why San Antonio put a weight limit on there to keep our Dorpers a little more moderate in size.
Excellent. We just had a question come in from Facebook. So again, just want to remind everybody, we're checking those in real time. So keep them coming. The question goes back to the Dorper and white Dorper. Is there any difference in those breeds besides the color?
I mean, if you really study the breeds and you go to the shows, there are some phenotypic differences as you just look at the breeds as a whole. But we can find sheep in each breed that exhibits the best characteristics. So for all purpose reality, no, there's really not a difference. I will say, probably in temperament, the white Dorper is a little more docile than some of our, what we consider our black-headed Dorpers. They can be a little wilder in the pen, but both of them typically tame down very easy after the ewes spend some time with them.
Excellent. Last question I have for you, Mr. Rader, deals with spots. And you talked about it, but I think it lends to a little more clarification. Can you explain why they're acceptable when they're shorn, but not otherwise?
Why they're acceptable? Well, we put in there when shorn because most of the sheep that walk in the ring are going to be shorn. And that was just to allude to that sometimes those sheep don't have black spots showing all the way through the wool. Of course, the classifier is never going to know that. So if you walk up and say, well, he's only got black spot and I shear him, we just can't have that. So that's why we put the limits in there, the size of a softball. And you just need to take that precaution to make sure that you buy a sheep that has been shorn.
All right. Well, you said the best for last. Certainly generated some questions there. Brad, thanks for leading us through the Dorpers. A breed that's still, again, expanding its reach in our show rings across the state of Texas, and definitely has its place in the industry. So as we're moving on, this is fun for me because this is the only breed the committee was comfortable with me talking about, and that's the medium wools, simply just because you can't mess it up. This is our breed, as you can read, just like I can, that just catches all the other breeds that classed out potentially, but also is primarily with our Suffolk and Hampshires, and then again, all those that fall into that breed. Again, the medium wools are extremely straightforward, yet we still found it fitting to include them in this training. So with that, I talked at the very beginning, lots of different players at the table to bring this to you. You just heard a combination and a collaboration between Texas A&M AgriLife Extension with our ag teachers and ATAT and our major livestock shows. At the end of the day, we put all these recommendations together. They sign off on them because they're going to be in their premium books. So there's a lot of different moving parts and pieces to this, and it just takes a lot of work and collaboration to bring these guidelines forward to you. So with that, certainly wanted to provide an opportunity to the leadership of these committees. And first I'd ask Mr. Dale Rankin, who serves as the chairman of the TCAAA Animal Industries Committees, to provide some remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Zanolini, for your leadership in this area. And basically, we started this exercise in developing and making these changes back in the fall of 2018. So it's been a good while in the making. And I want to take my hat off to Mr. Jamie Osborne, who kind of started developing and working with the committee back when he was the chairman for the Texas County Agriculture Agents Association. So Jamie, thank you for the work that you did to do this. And there again, I want to just include the major livestock shows and the partners that we have there, and want to thank the breeders that attended and helped work to develop these guidelines. And for yourself and Miss Gable for the hard work that y'all do, to get the training together. Also the legwork to working with the stock shows to get these guidelines. Thank Dr. Ramsey, Mr. Bladdock, Mr. Rader, Mr. Doggett for the work that they did on today's clinic and education. So that's all I have, Mr. Zanolini.
Hey, you bet, Dale. And thanks for your leadership now of that committee, and just so vital in communicating between our county extension agents and our major livestock shows, and then the validation committees. It's all welcomed advice, and you keep us on the right track. So we really appreciate that. Next, we have a hog guy on the call, folks, and that's Mr. Kevin Thomas. He's an ag science teacher in Jacksboro, and he serves as chair of the Major Livestock Show Advisory Committee with ATAT, which is a new name, isn't it, Mr. Thomas? Take it away.
Yes. Yes, sir. And really to shock you, Dr. Zanolini, I've never showed a hog. I grew up showing sheep. So, that's something I've set back today and listened to all the presenters and brings back a lot of those things. And much to echo what Dale said, really appreciate the breeders, the legwork. I know we redid the hogs last year, and there's a lot of moving parts, and appreciate the leadership to get all those out. And, for just to give transparency and education to our young teachers, our young agents, or like you brought myself in, someone from a different species, we can help those young people make those decisions. So on our side of the game, appreciate being a part of it, and I really appreciate the black and white transparency of this, and appreciate everybody for getting their parts together.
Wonderful, Mr. Thomas. Well, thank you again to your committee and the hard work you do. Folks don't see it necessarily across the state, but just know county extension agents and ag science teachers are constantly meeting for the betterment of youth and bringing important topics to light to the validation programs, and then also to the major livestock shows, and then just any opportunities or issues around the livestock project. Y'all are doing great work. So we appreciate both of you for joining us and providing remarks to us. I want to pitch it back to Dottie for just a second here, just to kind of reiterate where some of our resources are going to be. But we also have promised you some Q&A, and I know there's been some questions piling up, hadn't there been, Dottie?
Yeah, absolutely. We still have some really good questions coming in, and some questions that got asked early on in the presentation that we just went through that breed, and we're still going to be addressing them. So I see we still have quite a bit of folks with us, but there are still some leaving. So just want to remind them that we're not done here, and we're going to address all these questions before we close. So stick around with us. But before we do that, do want to remind you that the recording of this session together is going to be posted online at texasyouthlivestock.com. At that website, you're also going to find a lot of other resources related to the Market Land Project and any other of our livestock projects or species that you might be involved in. We have a lot of good stuff there. We also have, obviously you're interested in lambs if you're here. Like I alluded to earlier, Dr. Ramsey's been doing some videos that have been great. So check out that website. This recording will be there, as well as a lot of other things. So also want to remind you, if you're watching with us on Facebook, or even if you're not and you have a Facebook account, I'd ask you to like our page at Texas Youth Livestock and Ag. That's on Facebook. You can find it if you like it. We have lots of good stuff coming your way, again, for the Land Project, as well as all the other species that our young people show and are passionate about. We're trying to put stuff out that is going to help them. So keep going to those places, like them, share them, get them out to your friends, because the more we do, the more folks get to enjoy it with us. And that's sure been fun during this time. So without further ado, let's get back to some of our questions. And so Dr. Ramsey, if you're with us, let's get you unmuted. And the first question we have for you is kind of has to do with your role as a superintendent. So I want to get your input here on a question we had come in. It's also related to Southdowns, which we know that you are certainly a guru in that area. And it has to do with wool on the ears. So the question is that some shows, not our major livestock shows, but some shows throughout the year, ask exhibitors to remove all wool on the ears. If that's being done, how can you mitigate that or move forward when you're going to a terminal show or others to not get disqualified based on that rule?
That's a good question, Dottie. And so that's one thing that we've seen primarily in our Southdown breed, is that if you look in the rules, the wool needs to be a uniform length over the entire body. We've gotten into some of these Southdown breeders that bring us Southdowns that their ears look like a poodle. They're fluffed up. And part of that goes back to some of the northern breeding sheep shows. The Southdowns kind of show like that. But when you're asked to shear the wool on the ears, you don't necessarily have to shear the ears with a surgical blade. Most people with the Southdowns are probably using a fine top blade. And what I would do would be go in there and shear the wool off of that ear and blend it in to the wool coming off of the base of the ear. You don't have to get down and buzz cut it, but the main thing there is you don't want to leave, an inch of fluff on each ear. And so just normal shearing of that will suffice. And if that animal has wool fibers growing on the ear, classifiers are able to see that. The ears that are bare, that have no wool, those are the ones that you run into problems with.
Excellent. Good explanation there. Dr. Ramsey, while we have you, I'd like to ask you another question. So stay on the line with us. This has to do with birthmarks and something that's come up in every single breed we have. Certainly a question and something folks are interested in. In your role as a professor here at Texas A&M, or just your experience with sheep in general, is there a genetic factor that differentiates between dark pigmentation and dark fiber? And if so, how does that relate to birthmarks? Or can you just give us more clarification at all on that?
Sure. A birthmark is going to be a dark spot on the body of an animal that has black or brown fiber growing out of that spot. Okay. That is a birthmark. A birthmark produces dark fiber. Dark pigment is pigment within the skin that still produces a white fiber. And so there is a good difference there. It's a great question. Dark pigment you often see on our Southdowns and our Dorpers primarily. When you shear them very close, like we do at our stock shows, you will see the dark coloration in the skin, but that still produces a white fiber. Okay. A birthmark, you will see it before you shear them. The dark pigmentation, you may not see it until you shear them. But a birthmark is that you will see when the animal has wool on them, and it is a black or dark brown true fiber that is growing out of that spot.
Excellent, Dr. Ramsey. I knew you'd be the person to explain that in the best detail. So thanks for doing so. Up next, I have a question for Mr. Blahnik. If you would join us here, let's get you there. Josh, we had a question come in related to some other breeds that we see being shown at maybe state or national shows across the nation. When do you think Texas, or if Texas, will add some of these other breed classifications we see being shown in the rest of the country?
Good question. And, we get that brought up a lot. Texas is unique, that we've been primarily, 4 or 5 breeds now with the Dorpers. Dorpers, big part of our commercial industry. And so we show those, that's really a decision up to the major shows. They're the ones that determine, what breeds of cattle, what breeds of sheep are going to be shown. A lot of it is determined on numbers, and if it's justified to bring in, whether to sell money to support them, how their committee feels, time of the show. And so, it's not really a decision that's made by any one person or agents or ag teachers. It's determined by the shows. But, I would say right now, that would be a long ways down the road, just primarily because our show industry reflects the commercial industry. And in the state of Texas, our commercial sheep are comprised of Dorpers, fine wool crosses, and the medium wools and the Southdowns. So.
Excellent. Thanks, Mr. Blahnik. Up next, we have a question for Mr. Paget dealing with Southdowns. You covered this breed in detail. We had lots of folks saying that they love showing them. When you talk about the Southdown hoof color, is it required to be solid, or is some moderate streaking okay?
Well, according to the descriptions we went through here, it says black hooves. And so if you look at discriminatory striped hooves, so if the only problem they have is that they have some stripes in their hooves, and they should be okay classifying as long as they don't have any other issues. If you look there in number 10 of discriminatory breeds, striped hooves, ideally we'd like them black. So yeah, as long as they have some striping, and that's pretty common. We just have to make sure that there isn't any other issues that go along with that.
Excellent. Thanks for some more great information, Mr. Paget. One question we had come in on Facebook deals with letting young people know the reason they were disqualified or classed out in a major show. And so I'd like to expand on this a little bit. Our team has done a little bit of work on classification cards and their use at some of our shows. Of course, not all of our shows are using them yet, but we're working on that, but some of them are. And we've seen that they have been a really beneficial tool in terms of education and learning for young people and young people's families as they go out the next year and start purchasing livestock. And what I mean by classification card, if you haven't seen it yet, Rodeo Austin is one of our major shows who utilizes classification cards. And so this is a card, quite simply, on a piece of paper that has the reasons for either discriminatory characteristics or absolute disqualifications and those reasons. And classifiers actually circle or mark the reasons that that animal classed out. And so that's one example of a way that we have an educational tool and a learning experience to come out of what would otherwise be a pretty disheartening or discouraging experience to be classed out at one of our shows. So we're working on that. Certainly appreciative of those shows who are putting that in, and look forward to other ones doing it where feasible, of course, for their show. Other than that, it's up to the discretion of the classifiers to give reasons if they want to. So certainly our shows have a mission to keep things rolling and keep things moving. And so that's certainly one aspect. So you're not always going to get a clear explanation, but we understand and agree that a learning experience coming out of that is a good thing. So we're going to keep trying our best on that. Next question has to deal with the classifiers in general. And I'm going to kick this one to Dr. Zanolini. Billy, how are classifiers chosen for shows? And also, are they trained before doing so?
That's a great question, Dottie, and I think it's really a mixed bag, but I'll just return back to the importance of the Major Livestock Show Advisory Committee and the Animal Industries Committee. Those group of professionals that know this business and this industry so well collaborate on a list and then take that list and present it to the major livestock shows, and they have the discretion to go ahead and hire the classifiers they see fit to best fit their show. Lots of variables there, conflicts of interest, availability, and other things. But just in general, yes, classifiers will participate in some type of classification workshop that takes place, or have some level of high level of competence within a breed to be selected, Dottie.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Zanolini. And one more time, just from me before I kick it back to Billy, want to thank everybody for being so engaged, so responsive, and getting those questions in. This has been a great bunch about asking really good questions and taking advantage of having some true experts on the line with us and using them and asking them during this time. So with that, one more time, just want to ask you to like, comment, and share that post. The more you do, the more your friends see it. We know there's a lot of people who joined us today, but there's also still a bunch of people out there who show lambs who just didn't catch it today with us. And so if they didn't, they can always find it on our Facebook page at Texas Youth Livestock and Ag. They can also find it online at our website, right there on the screen, texasyouthlivestock.com. There we have this recording as well as lots of others that will help you along your way. And mostly, we just want you to know that we're appreciative of you for joining in and are always happy to help. So, Billy, that's about wrapping up our time together.
Outstanding, Dottie, and a special thanks to you for quarterbacking this deal for us. There's a lot of moving parts with coordinating these experts, gathering those questions. And another shout out to the TYLA team that's been monitoring Facebook and Zoom. Y'all are the best. You know who you are. We really appreciate what you've done. But most of the praise goes to these committees that I've mentioned a couple times, our major livestock show partners, and just all the people that collaborate together to increase education around the Youth Livestock Project and the youth livestock industry, because everybody listening and will listen to this in the future just knows the impact this has on young people. And that's why you continue to support this program with your time, your energy, and a lot of cases your funding. Just an incredible program, and we just thank everybody so much for joining today. Be blessed and have a great evening. And then also don't forget to come back to our website and check out these resources at a later date. Our panelists, one more thank you. You made time for us this afternoon, and for lots of training prior to this. We thank each and every one of you. So good night, everybody.